p.m. on Thursday, March the 13th, 2025. And I'm having some inspiring thoughts as I walk, as I usually do. And as I also often do, I have made the mistake of not recording myself at the beginning of these thoughts. So I will not make the mistake further and begin recording now. So I'm reading the first book in the series of the Chronicles of Narnia for the first time. I know you may be thinking to yourself, what? I read that when I was 9 years old. And you're 42 and this is your first time? Yep. But guess what? I don't think it's the age that matters in these things. I think it's the eyes to see and the ears to hear that really matter. Whether it's a child who reads it or whether it's an adult. And I have that right now. And I am making wonderful connections and understandings through this book, through its deeper wisdom. And this is just book 1. And I was thinking to myself just now about the experience of Narnia and the sudden entrance into that world from the children. While they were still physically present in their other world, or Earth, as we refer to it. And I saw Narnia, as I imagine everyone has at some point, as a type of heaven. And I began to wonder to myself, is heaven something that we only experience when we die and when we leave this earth? Well, I suppose when we leave this earth, there's a lot of truth to that statement. Doesn't mean we physically die, but it perhaps means that we die to the ways and the understandings of this earth, and we open our eyes to see how things really are. I suppose as the experience of the new earth. And why is it that there's a new heaven and a new earth? Ever thought about that? Why would there have to be a new heaven? Why does heaven need to be renewed? Isn't heaven already wonderful and blissful? I'm just thinking this to myself right now. Well, perhaps the heaven it's referring to is more like the skies, the view above. A new earth and a new heaven. Imagine you wake up one morning and you go outside and you look out into the sky and you see planets. More than before. Big planets. Or that the sun is bigger, or warmer, or brighter. More cheerful and less weary. That the earth seems younger and more vibrant, rich, bountiful, waiting to be explored and enjoyed and shared with us. That seems a lot like the picture painted of Narnia when it's first discovered. The original paradise. And I suspect that in the Chronicles of Narnia, paradise is lost. And then it is regained. And I suppose all these themes are going to culminate in, well, the new heaven and the new earth that are restored after the evil has been done away with. Right? These are all the themes. And we know that C.S. Lewis was a devout Christian, an apologeticist, however you say it. And so he was fully aware of all the themes and intricacies and nuances and wisdom of what he was saying. So we would be wise and insightful to read these books with the eyes of a child and the wisdom of someone who has seen much and experienced much, to put the pieces together and have our eyes opened and our ears opened to things that are more real than our physical eyes and ears can see and hear. So what I was thinking about earlier was, is heaven just an experience for later after we leave this earth, or can we experience it now? And I've had these moments where I'm walking. I remember one in particular. I was going for a walk in Playa del Coco in Costa Rica. Very hot day, dry, sunny. Walking from the condo to a grocery store. And I remember as I was walking that I had this sensation of sparkles around me, wings above me. Were they my own wings? Or were they the wings of someone who was watching over me? There was a big field next to me along the road. It was empty, full of grass and a few trees. But somewhere I sensed that there were wonderful things in that field. Creatures, colors, beautiful things, magical things. I remember sensing it in such a way that if I wanted to, I could enter into that world and enjoy it. And live my life as though that was the reality of things. Well, isn't that something? How in this book, when it talks about the children and Uncle Andrew, how the children immediately have no fear and their curiosity gets the best of them, and they go approach the animals and they begin speaking to them, and the animals understand them and they understand the animals. And my understanding is that it's because they're pure of heart. They have the right, healthy perspective of things. They can see and they can hear. Uncle Andrew, on the other hand, sees wild animals who may just rush at him and kill him. And when the animals are speaking, all he hears are animal noises. How is it that Uncle Andrew and the kids had different experiences? One heard the animals speak, the other did not. Perhaps that's like our experience on this earth. There are those who can hear nature, if you will, hear it speak to them, and those who hear normal sounds, what we think is normal, what we've always thought is normal, perhaps what we've feared and been uncertain and unsure about before is actually quite wonderful and quite beautiful if we would only allow our curiosity to get the best of us and start asking questions and start opening ourselves up to that possibility, to that reality, which is more real than this reality. This being what we think is normal, which is not normal. And so I was thinking to myself, as I walk this road, perhaps there is a new heaven and a new earth already there, right now. And as simply as I can walk through a door, I can walk into that reality. Just like the kids put on the rings and came out of a pool and were in the, enchanted forest, in the wonderful woods, whatever that was called, the green forest, and then went into another pool and went to another world, like a portal. What if, my friends, that's a real thing? What if portals aren't necessarily what we think they are? Some kind of physical thing that we can see and walk into. Well, perhaps they are, once we can see them for what they are, but what if, perhaps, we are a sort of portal ourselves? And all we have to do is believe it, perhaps, and we can very well walk into that reality, that very moment. How does the scripture say? To those who believe and do not doubt in their heart, all things are possible. All things are possible. What if right now as I walk, there are innumerable creatures, beings, watching me, cheering me on, saying, hey, he's starting to understand it. He's starting to see. Soon enough, he will see us for who we really are. It will not just be air and open space anymore. We will be seen and we will be known by him. But I suppose that would require on my part the ability to not live in fear. No fear, a phrase often repeated in this first book. The Magician's Nephew. No fear. That means being able to be in a place that is foreign, unknown, and not be afraid of what you see. I doubt that many of us, if we were given eyes to see all that really existed around us, would not be terribly frightened and afraid. Think back to the Old Testament with Elisha and Elijah. What happened? Or perhaps I'm getting this wrong. Was it Elisha and his servant? In any case, the eyes of the servant were opened to see chariots of fire, which, in modern terms, could have been spaceships lining the hills. To show this person who only up until that point had been seeing with earth eyes what actually exists in a much more real realm. when you can see with other eyes. Ooh, that's the good title for a book. When you have eyes to see and ears to hear. I love that title. What if that title was given to me just now by this other realm, the real realm, and as I'm tuning into it, becoming more aware of it, I receive this inspiration. What if that's how we receive inspiration? And so here I am, walking on a plain neighborhood road, a residential street. To the average person, all one would see is houses and streetlights and a dark blue cloudy sky. The moon, I believe it's a full moon, obscured by a thin layer of clouds. And the wind in the trees. And to others who look at what's around, may hear nature speaking, which is really God speaking through nature. May look at this giant cottonwood tree and see something more wonderful than a bare tree with no leaves on it. Something bright and colorful, wonderful, moving, radiant. Perhaps this is what people see when they're using, what are those? Psychedelics, that's the word. What if we can see those sorts of things without the use of psychedelics? What if we can have that experience on demand, if you will? And by on demand, I mean at will, at any given moment. We, like Polly and Diggory, can put on the rings and jump into another world. And isn't that something? How both Lewis just getting out of the wind. How both Lewis and Tolkien had rings in their stories. Rings that were powerful. Rings that transported you to another realm when they were put on. This isn't to say that there's rings out there that we need to find and put on to experience this magical world in reality, but that we have the ability to do that as God's creation. It's always been there. We just forgot. Another theme in this book that I'm seeing with the forgetting and the remembering. How when they enter into this other world, it's like that's all they've ever known. And it takes them a moment to recall that they actually had another life on Earth. But that this new world, this Narnia, was much more wonderful and natural and more like home than Earth. And I suppose the one thing that is true that we could all agree on is whether you agree with me that we can experience heaven on earth now or not. We all have that longing. We all have that desire to do so. And my advice to you is this. It would be the same to myself. As it says in the scripture, draw near to God, and God will draw near to you. Why does it put us in the place of the acting first? I don't know the full answer to that right now, but I think it's important to consider that the onus is on us to make the first move. But once we've done so, just like the prodigal son returning to the father, making the first move, how many of us know and understand that God will come running with open arms the rest of the way to us? So in this life, consider the ways in which you can put on this magic ring, whatever that may look like for you, to begin to see and perceive a reality that is much more real and wonderful and beautiful than what we see in our everyday earthly lives. That there is a heaven that can be experienced on earth. The as above, so below kind of idea. And I know I've had my struggles with those kind of sayings where those thoughts have come to tell me, Ray, that's just new age mumbo jumbo. Don't fall for that stuff. It'll lead you astray. And then I'm like, hold on a second. What did Jesus say in that prayer? Your kingdom. Whose kingdom? God's kingdom. Come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Well, I think for the most of us, we would consider heaven as being above and earth as being below heaven, as the sky is above the earth and the earth is below the sky. And as such, we can say things like, as above, so below. And we can also add to that, as within, so without. How many times did God talk about the heart in Scripture? The importance of the heart. Where is the heart? The heart is within. It is a world within. And the experience of our lives outside of us is characterized by the condition and the state of our hearts. So, if you will, if we can have the experience of Narnia in our hearts, we will surely begin to experience it without in this world that we live in, which will become less of the typical world we're used to and more of a magical, beautiful world full of curiosity and adventure. You may say to yourself, Ray, you're crazy. But I will tell you that I have experienced exactly what I'm talking about. I've experienced it. This sort of other realm, if you will. And it's not necessarily that I'm seeing things, but I'm sensing them, I'm feeling them in that way. It's as though seeing and hearing in a physical way are only limited to what is here on this earth. For anything that exists can only exist because we see it, and we hear it, and we can touch it, and taste it, and smell it. but with who we really are, our very essence, our spiritual being that exists, it too has its own senses that can sense things in that reality, which is the actual reality, which we can't see with our physical eyes necessarily, or hear with our physical ears. But we can perceive them in a spiritual way with our spiritual eyes and ears. And that's why we can have such a deep sense of their existence, of their reality, of the truth, of everything I've been saying so far, because you feel it too, deep on the inside. You know it's true. Because it's the same for all of us. We all feel this way. More often than not, we've all had at least one experience in our life where we feel like we have connected with the divine, where we have touched heaven, or heaven has touched us, I suppose. And so in this book, that would be an interesting way to go about it, to make the connection between our physical senses of hearing and seeing to our spiritual senses of hearing and seeing. And I imagine there's been a book written about this already, but not in the way that I would write it, and the experiences that I would share, which are very personal and unique to me. So it's worth sharing, I would say, even so. These are the things I think about and I consider, much like C.S. Lewis. In fact, sometimes I wonder if I somehow don't have the same inspiration as someone like C.S. Lewis had. Well, of course I do, because C.S. Lewis was inspired by God, and so am I. But that I have the same sort of curious and intellectual and deep-thinking mind as C.S. Lewis. And so it must be that I too will write books and speak and inspire and encourage others. And that will be my role in this battle that we are in on this earth. And perhaps something that continues later on in the new earth as I speak and share stories of inspiration and encouragement and reminders. And of course play music. But something still loves those deep conversations with others and asking questions and being curious. What an extension of this life that would be, to go up to, I don't know, Moses or Elijah or Joseph or David, Jesus, and ask questions and be curious. I would love that. I will love that. I already love that. And that's another thing, speaking in terms of now, because time doesn't exist, and this is all just one big moment of now. Technically, I'm already in that reality, in that new earth. And every day, in a way, it's pulling away another layer to help me see more clearly. Pulling away another drape so that the image starts to become more and more clear out the window. I had another thought, but it escapes me in this moment. It was a good connection with what I was just talking about, but that's okay. Perhaps for another time. If I share this, and you're listening to this, and you heard the whole thing, thank you for listening. I pray it stirred something in you, inspired something in you, encouraged something in you, and helped you to see a little more with those eyes and hear a little more with those ears. To be able to begin to become more aware of and more comfortable with and open to this new way of experiencing life, which is really how life actually is. Similar themes can be found in The Matrix. But Neo thinks, or I suppose Thomas Anderson thinks, he is living what we would call a typical, ordinary human life, but finds out later on that he is brainwashed and he's a slave. I'd like to find out that reality is much different, but then that reality can also be much more beautiful, if shocking at first. But again, the amount of shock, as alluded to in these by Lewis, the amount of shock would correspond to the level of awareness one has, the level of openness and curiosity that one has, the amount of fear that one may have of the unknown, the amount of willingness to risk exploring the uncertain. And why is it that we have this tendency to fear that which is unknown to us, that which we don't understand? How can we not finally see that that which we don't know and don't understand could very well be the very thing that we've been running from, can be the most beautiful thing for us to understand and to know? Just like Uncle Andrew, who was afraid of the animals, he could have had a beautiful experience like the children had in speaking with the animals, but he didn't, because he had this fear of the unknown, and his mind was set in fear and in ways of living that I suppose were not pure and open-hearted, unlike the children, who had a totally different experience. And so if Thomas Anderson, or Neo, was initially more open-hearted and willing to embrace the unknown, it would have been a smoother experience, but it was shocking at first, and he had to get over the shock of that transition. I don't know if I'll add this, but if I do add this, I will end this again. Thank you for listening. I hope it encourages you and inspires you. And as always, live inspired. And I pray that you continue to know what it is to have eyes to see and ears to hear. Thank you for listening, and until next time, live inspired.